Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining today. It looks like we have a couple more people joining, so I'll wait just another minute before we get started. Okay, we'll get started. My name is Christy Hegner. I'm one of the CACFP and consultants with CACFP. And we have Terry and Kelly on today, our analysts, which many of you will be familiar with. And Krista is also here, our secretary, helping with providing links. I'm going to go off camera just so it's easier to present. Okay, today we're going to be talking about common findings in CACFP, everyone's favorite topic, I'm sure, but very important, and that we will talk about why it's so important today. So today, everyone should be muted. If you do have questions, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A section, which you can see on the screen where it's located. Kelly and Terry will be answering your questions that way. Avoid using the chat, please, because that's where Krista is going to enter all the links that I discussed throughout the training today. So it helps keep it organized, the questions in one spot and then the links in the chat. As a reminder, if you're not aware, our Thinking Thursdays are on our CACFP training website. They are located towards the bottom under the Thinking Thursday link. As of the last month or so, thankfully, Krista has been on board a little while now, and she is helping us upload all the videos of these recordings. So it's a lot easier for you to review previous trainings because you get to see the whole video instead of just the PowerPoint slides, which makes a lot more sense. And you can also go back and take those trainings and receive certificates for them. And there's an explanation on our website for how to do so, as well as a new way to receive certificates from these live trainings. At the end of the webinar, there'll be a QR code for you to use. And our next Thinking Thursday is we're going to take a break over the summer, but we'll resume September. I put on there likely we might have one at the end of August. So just stay tuned. We'll advertise for them in our newsletters like we always do. The learning objectives that we're going to go over today that we want to make sure you leave with understanding, including how to identify common CACFP findings. You'll be able to understand and apply accurate record keeping practices, how to or understand sponsor oversight requirements because sponsors have some unique requirements they need to know, as well as how to develop an effective corrective action plan when you do have findings, which we hope are very few, but as we know, they are common, which is why we are having this training today. So when we get started here, I'd like to know who is in the virtual room with us. So Krista's going to put up a poll shortly, and please let us know where you're from. I'm just going to give it another minute for everyone to have a chance to respond. Okay. I'm going to end that. Looks like majority are sponsoring organizations. Let's see if you can see this. As well as child care centers and school food authorities. So no family daycare homes or any of the other unique um, sponsors. And everyone likes a quiz on a Thursday afternoon. So I'm going to have these questions up on the screen that Krista's going to put up shortly. I'll read through them as you can answer them as well. This is just kind of giving us an idea of a few things that you all may or may not know yet. So first one, a sponsor has 1 hour to provide records from the previous fiscal year. True or false? Second one, being on the National Disqualified List, known as NDL, still allows you to work as a director at another center. True or false? A corrective action plan, also known as a CAP, is only needed when you have meal count errors. True or false? Number 4, you only need to monitor your center or sites once a year. True or false? Then the last question, separate accounting and financial tracking for the nonprofit food service account, also known as NFSA, requires a separate bank account. We've got about 50% answered so far. Okay, this is just to give us an idea of what you all know ahead of time versus hopefully you'll learn if you didn't know these answers by the end of our training. So thank you for participating. Now we're going to get started into the real training today with a few more actually background information. If you're unfamiliar, this is our website. Most of you very likely have navigated this before. However, you have not, there's a ton of resources on it, including under the resources tab. You can find lots of trainings under the training tab. Instructions and forms is very valuable as well. And you should see the link pop up for the website if it hasn't yet. This is the map of where our analysts are assigned to, and it has changed in the past month. So if this is not 100% accurate, it's okay. The best way to find out who your analyst is, if you are unfamiliar, is to contact us on our contact section on our website. And if you have a current analyst that you think is your analyst, they'll gladly let you know who your assigned analyst is if you're unfamiliar. And they are invaluable. So please, with any questions you have, please ask your analyst. I can't emphasize that enough. Okay, what are we going to do to reduce the risk of findings? Start off by planning to succeed. This goes without saying. Maintaining accurate and organized records is vital. If you don't have the records, you really, it's impossible to be compliant in our program. You will have meals and snacks disallowed if you do not have proper record keeping. Any documentation that is required is basically surrounding all meals that are needing to be claimed, and that is the purpose for the meals to be claimed for our food program. So if you claim it, you must have documentation to support it. This supporting documents handout is two-sided, front and back. that you can use and that's highly recommended you use anytime you're getting ready for an upcoming administrative review, anytime you want to just check in to make sure you have covered all your bases and that you're not missing any documentations that you might need. Even if you've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, I highly recommend you reference this, keeping in mind that not everything on this list is going to be necessarily pertain to your program. But again, when in doubt, ask your analyst. Overall, we're going to go through 4 sections of common findings. I'm not sure why it is out of order. These are the 4 sections. So general, I kind of grouped it into administrative and claiming as one. Second section we'll discuss is meal patterns and menu documentation. Third section is fiscal related. And the fourth is findings specific to sponsoring organizations. Now, starting with the general claiming, common findings with this section. We see a lot of these in your accurate monthly meal reconciliation or inaccurate claims. Number of food service days we find are incorrect in mind, which is where you enter the claim. When it comes to enrollment or income eligibility, missing or inaccurate income eligibility forms, missing enrollment forms. And then in regards to training, we see a lack of proper training or lack of training not completed for staff. Specifically, one thing I want to point out is we find that there's training is lacking for the person that's actually training your staff. So it might be you. So remember, you as the trainer also needs to be trained. And I'll touch on a little more detail on that coming up soon. One thing that's required, attendance records for all programs. So this is specifically attendance, not meal attendance right now. So attendance is required for all programs. It is not the same as meal count records. If you have an at-risk after-school meal program, a common finding is attendance is forgotten to be taken, which is required. Highly recommend, and I did see several sponsoring orgs and school food authorities on this call. If you have a point of service, electronic point of service, use that because that counts as attendance and meal counts. We do see some schools that have a electronic point of service system or software, and they use it at breakfast and lunch, and they don't use it for at-risk after school. Please use it if you have it. And there's a lot more information in the at-risk after-school meals guide if you want a lot more details on that program. When it comes to income eligibility forms, we can't emphasize this enough. Please use the correct form. The 2 that you see up here on the screen are the only 2 forms you are allowed to use in CACFP. So either the HIES form, also known as the Household Income Eligibility Form, which is on the left, or the Education and Nutrition Benefits Application, which is on your right. If you're just a child care center, not school related, you most likely use the HIES form. If you're a school program, you likely use the Education and Nutrition Benefits Application. For schools, please be aware that this is not the CEP form. You cannot use the CEP form for our program. So yes, families would have to fill out 2 forms potentially. A little more detail about income eligibility forms. Schools can use direct certification lists to determine eligibility. Just make sure you have it documented and you have it in your possession, not the main office at your school or administrative building. A reminder, if you work separately from that department that handles the forms, please have them share with you. Communicate with the administration that you need those forms. And then, almost most importantly, have the forms and then have them correctly categorized, whether it be free, reduced, or paid. One thing we see lacking is the communication between areas or departments. And I know it can be a challenge when it comes to schools, especially larger districts. Unfortunately, sometimes food service or childcare is kind of brushed aside, but please do your best in communicating with the administration and make sure they know how important these forms are. Some more details on staff training. As you'll see, this annual staff training checklist is very helpful. This is also two-sided on our website as well. Please only use this as a template, meaning don't take this and just have your name on it, location, sign it, and say this is what we did. Because the point of these little dots next to every single item here is for you to check off and show the analysts what you train them on, your staff. There are trainings that are required every year, like under number 1, civil rights. All staff needs to be trained annually on that. But further down on the list, there's things like monitoring. Well, you don't need to train certain people in your organization on monitoring if they're not doing the monitoring. It's useful to know certain things, like teachers should definitely be trained on meal patterns, should be trained on point of service. So be aware that this is a template. When you must have a sign-in sheet dated, and make sure we know what you're actually training your staff on. Kind of touched on this already, but besides, say, using the checklist I just showed, you can make your own agenda. You do not have to use that form, but make sure these items are listed or provided in documentation. So the date and location of where you trained, the topics specifically that you covered, attendees signed in, and then for new staff, before starting their position, please make sure they are trained. And then there's extra training for sponsoring organizations. I highly recommend you take the sponsoring organizations oversight and site monitoring responsibilities to learn about the additional responsibilities and requirements if you're a sponsoring organization. Okay, so best practices when it comes to this section of what I'm calling general or claiming. It might sound like a no-brainer, but find a system that works for you and follow it. That is key. Do not follow a system that works for your friend or your previous supervisor. Use a system that works for you. Please review meal counts and daily attendance. This is all tied to reimbursement, so please make sure those are accurate. When it comes to auditing, our analysts come out and audit you, but we highly recommend you do internal audits to verify your claims are correct. Training your staff at the same time every year is absolutely a best practice because then you won't forget or miss staff. And having more than one person able to submit and certify your claim is definitely a best practice. We have had situations that only one person in an organization was able to certify a claim, and that person got sick, was in the hospital, was not able to submit the claim, and there was no one at his organization that was able to do so, so they lost out in quite a bit of money. So please be mindful of that. That's an easy thing to add. Ask your analysts if you're not sure how to add another person, they'll easily help you with that. And then edit checks, it seems like to be the favorite word or phrase when it comes to findings. If you have edit checks in place, you're a lot less likely to make errors and thus less likely to have findings. Okay, the next section I'm going to talk about is meal patterns and menu documentation and some common findings associated with these topics. So what we see commonly are missing details or changes not made on menus when we come and do administrative reviews. We sometimes see the meal count forms just not properly completed. A big one is point of service not taken period or incorrectly taken. And I'll expand on that in the next few slides. Unfortunately, we're still seeing grain-based desserts served, which are not allowed and have not been since 2017. A common finding is also more so centers. Schools have a bit easier time with child nutrition labels or product formulation statements, but everyone needs them, along with standardized recipes if you're making homemade recipes. And then we also see non-credible foods served, which I'll discuss in a few slides as well to give some examples. So to help with this, we do have a training, which you're going to hear a lot. We have lots of different trainings on specific topics, one of those being the product labels and standardized recipes learning module. I also did a previous Thinking Thursday with Emily Mattern from the school nutrition side, where we talked about how to find child nutrition labels and product formulation statements. Because it can be a little tricky if you're not in a school, but it is doable and is required. Some requirements surrounding meal attendance. So however you do your meal counts, they must show the meals that are served to enrolled participants by meal type, because that's directly how you enter them into the claim. They must be taken at point of service, all meals and snacks. Attendance for child and for schools and centers must include participants' full name. If you're an at-risk after-school program, it can be taken by aggregate, count, or name, but still must be at point of service. And then a best practice when it comes to meal attendance forms is showing the reimbursement category on the same page. Like say, first page would be all A's, second page all B, third page would be all C's, without overtly identifying them, obviously. So if you do it by category, it's fairly easy to not have it obvious. And then as a reminder, include program adults, record those program adults. Okay, point of service meal attendance. I want to emphasize this a little bit because our analysts do see this quite often, and I see it too. I say we because I do go out on reviews when I'm able to with analysts, so I observe this as well. They must be taken, records must be taken, specific meal counts at the time the child's eaten, and they must match the claim. So common things we see are full names not being written down. Sometimes centers only use the attendance, which does not count for meal attendance. They might get busy, the teacher gets distracted and just forgets to mark down the meal, or they do it after the kids are away from the table, they're washing their hands, or they're getting ready for nap time. And then we see inaccurate counting because it is easy to miscount, especially when you're doing hand check marks. The last point here, the point of service exception, it's really not an exception to point of service. However, you don't need two forms if you're using the electronic point of service, which I mentioned earlier, because that captures both the attendance and the meal count. So I should have written that differently. It's not an exception to point of service. It's just you only need one record if you're using your electronic software.
Christy, can I just jump in for a second on that?
Yes, sure.
Yes. So it's an exception. They can do it as long as the kids are punching in their ID number so it can be tracked as to who received the meals. If they're just like hitting a button like for a meal, then that would not be acceptable. We want it by ID number, them punching in a code.
Yes, thanks for clarifying because clicking a button would not count because we have no idea what child would be counted. But yes, specifically, it has to identify the child to the in the software program. Yep. Thanks, Terry. Okay, a reminder for consolidating meal, totaling the point of service meal counts at the meal service, and then adding up the amount for each meal is the consolidation. Never okay to recreate these meal counts based on memory or using center attendance. You need original documentation of the meal attendance while for submitting the claim. We do have a meal attendance summary record that you're free to use that we can provide, and I believe that is on our website too. And then again, then I'm going to reiterate this entire training, edit checks, having a second set of eyes is really important to avoid errors because our analysts come out and they could be the second set of eyes, and we do find errors quite often. A few things about menus. We have templates, we have sample menus online. There's tons that you can research and find on your own if you need some more variety. But the basics are it must be dated. We want them posted so we can see, especially when there's changes to the menus. When we show up, we want to see what is on the menu that's actually being served. No problem crossing off stuff on the menu. We want you to do that if you're not serving what's on the menu that's posted. And if you use a template, you can easily, whoever's playing the menu, know that you're not missing food component, a meal components. And then best practices, ideally you do at least a couple week cycle. I like to see 4-week cycle, but it's not always doable for some places. Okay, now on to crediting foods. Like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to labels, we need the CN label or product formulation statements for processed foods or meats, or a reminder. Oh, if you have not heard yet, which you likely have, milk is going to change. As of June 8th, it's pretty much happening for sure that 2% and whole milk will now be allowed unflavored, which is a huge change. It is not required, but it is allowable after beginning June 8th. We will have a lot more guidance on this coming up. But in case you haven't heard, that is a big change. Still no flavored milk for under 6-year-olds, but unflavored 2% of whole milk will be allowed. And then a reminder, if you are receiving vended meals, it is your responsibility to make sure all the foods you receive are credible. A few more reminders, which we have talked about several times. I've provided several trainings on these topics, but in case you're new or just need a refresher, added sugar requirements are in effect for breakfast cereals and yogurt with added sugars now, not total sugars. The whole grain requirement must be served, one whole grain must be served every day at one meal or snack. But if you serve, for example, just an at-risk after school supper, then that grain that you serve at that supper must be a whole grain. Again, no grain-based desserts. We are still seeing cereal bars, but called oatmeal rounds or granola bars or fancy type of crackers with sugar on them. When in doubt, ask your analysts. We have several other Thinking Thursdays, like I mentioned, on added sugars, whole grains as well. Here's a definitely not all-inclusive list of some common miscredited foods. However, we thought we'd be worth mentioning a few. So they may or may not be creditable. You need to check. Not ideal foods to be serving. You could find a lot more nutritious options than what I have listed here under the may or may not be credible option. Um, but specifically, I'm going to talk about tortilla chips in the next slide because that can vary greatly on whether it's creditable or not. Foods that are never creditable include breakfast bars, fruit-filled bars, granola bars, anything with sugar, confetti, sprinkles, chocolate are not allowed. When it comes to the corn chips or tortilla chips, there are whole grain options and there are regular enriched options. Be aware many are not whole grain rich, but you still do need the product formulation statement. The link that Chris is posting is a great resource from Wisconsin that goes into great detail about what foods, what corn chip brands may be credible. Okay, some best practices when it comes to meal patterns and documentation. Be sure your teaching staff knows the meal pattern requirements. So, say they have to swap out a snack or a fruit or a vegetable or whatever the component is, a grain. Be sure they know so they're not swapping it for something that is not creditable. Again, have all the staff that basically touches the food, serves the food, orders it, receives it from a vendor, that they all understand the meal patterns as well as point of service and family style meals if it's applicable to your site. Ideally, best practice is using electronic point of service. However, we know that's not practical for everybody. And then when in doubt, always ask your analysts. They are more than happy to help you determine and let you know whether the food's credible or not. Here are several resources if you want to know more detail on menus and meal patterns. There's a lot of resources. Just got to take the time to review them. Okay, I'm not going into a ton of detail when it comes to fiscal. This is a big topic that we would not have the time to go over it all. And we're already for almost 45 minutes in today. But I wanted to point out a few things. There have been changes to our area to fiscal in CACFP, especially in regards to record keeping. These requirements include using funds responsibly, maintaining the nonprofit operation, and just kind of fine tuning our record keeping to be more accountable and make sure we have records that back up all of the claims. So here are some common findings that we're seeing in regards to fiscals, things like just lack of documentation and or missing receipts. We see unallowable costs sometimes charged. We do have the allowable and non-allowable expense document, which is very helpful. And then inconsistencies when it comes to the budget. I'm going to expand a little bit on this. So when it comes to the changes are due to new changes in federal regulations when it comes to the Child Nutrition Program Integrity final rule that came out. So it's kind of given us more requirements to require from you all to document more fiscal related things or topics. One thing I want to point out, the nonprofit food service account, if you've not heard of it, it's a dedicated account used by you for any program participating in child nutrition programs to specifically manage funds exclusive for food service operations. This means that all revenue from food service operations need to go through the nonprofit food service account and not to be used for other purposes. However, it does not need to be a separate bank account, but separate accounting needs to be done to houses all the food service activity. So some best practices when it comes to fiscal oversight, please keep all receipts and invoices that you receive. Make copies because we know receipts fade, and we will need to see those. Stay organized, just like when I talked about at the beginning. Stay organized and keep your receipts organized either by month or however you find is best for you. But please organize them in a way that when we come out, you can hand us. Please don't hand us an envelope full of random receipts, but an organized binder or file folder with them. Keeping a detailed general ledger or some sort of financial tracking that separates food service activity is a best practice. Making notes, you can write on the receipt if it doesn't make sense or it's cut off, so we understand what the purchase was. Best practice is separating food purchases from non-food purchases, and by paying separately is ideal. And I realized I misspoke. It was not 45 minutes into this training. It was 45 minutes into when I started my practice session. So I apologize. It's only 2:36 on my on my laptop. The last best practice we suggest, so when you do shop, say you're independent or a sponsored organization that's not a school and you're doing your own shopping, separate purchases. It's a lot easier if you have your personal purchases separate from your CACFP purchases. Not required, but helpful. For those sponsoring organizations, here are some common findings that we see. Monitoring forms. Monitoring is required for sponsoring organizations, so they may be missing or inaccurate. We see missing building for the future communication. If you don't have this specific form, it's okay. You can use your own. However, it's a way that you communicate with your individual sites about CACFP. And we do have that on our website as well. Excuse me, it is also being required to be uploaded in your application this year for how you communicate, whether you use our form or not. So that is a new addition to Nexus this year. And then again, we mentioned this earlier today, but we have this training module on oversight and site monitoring responsibilities module online. A few details I wanted to touch on when it comes to monitoring requirements. This is for sites operating 10 months or longer, which is majority of our sponsors. You must review the facility 3 times per year, with at least 2 of them being unannounced. And at least one of those unannounced must include a meal observation. Ideally, that is varied. Please don't go on the first of the month, every month at lunchtime. The point is for you to find findings so you can correct them before the analysts come out. And then it's even more of a challenge to correct those. So please try to get out as much as possible to your sites and do proper monitoring for a successful program. Here's some more common findings. No follow-up happening, no monitoring done or not enough based on the number that you're required. Having outdated forms. So school nutrition and summer food service program have monitoring forms, but you must use ours in CACFP. And they are found on our website as well. There's 3 different ones that we have depending on what type of program you have. So some best practices when it comes to sponsoring organizations. For specifically monitoring, we have a tracking tool so you can keep track of what sites you monitor when, so you'll know when to do the next follow-up or if a follow-up is needed. It's a simple spreadsheet to monitor that. Best practice is thoroughly completing the form. Don't leave things blank. Make sure you go back and reread your what you filled out to make sure you're not missing sections or questions. having a second person that is on the form. There's a spot for a second signature. And then please follow up if you do see findings. We know it's your own organization, but you should be following up to make sure those are corrected. Not a fun topic, but what happens if you do receive findings? We're going to go into a little more detail now. Of course, there's mandatory repayment of the reimbursement. You'll have required corrective action. It could lead to more oversight or would lead to more oversight by us at MDE. And then worst case scenario is you can no longer participate in our program and or you end up on the national disqualified list, which we do never want to see happen, but it definitely happens, unfortunately. So if you're not familiar with the NDL is, this kind of gives a brief overview. It's a federal database managed by USDA, and it lists centers and individuals that are terminated from CACFP for serious noncompliance. If you are listed on the NDL, it's fairly severe, in my opinion. You can no longer participate in CACFP, you lose your reimbursement. You're disqualified for at least 7 years or longer if you still have debt to be owed. Obviously, that looks really bad. Your reputation could suffer. You can also not participate in any other child nutrition programs while on this list. But we can definitely avoid being on this list by being proactive, by focusing on organization, keeping accurate records, tracking your expenses and reimbursements carefully, following the meal pattern requirements, doing all the required training and implementing what you are learning in the trainings. And then communicate. You cannot communicate too much, which I'm sure the analysts appreciate, because the more they can help you ahead of time, it really saves you down the road. We don't want the same errors happening month after month when you could correct them earlier on. Okay, we're going to talk about how to write a corrective action plan. You may have never had to do one, or if you did, you might not have been aware of exactly how to do it. Make sure you understand the findings that you received from your review. Say you received 5 findings. Make sure you understand them. Then next, start gathering the documents you need for what is missing. Thirdly, draft a response that's clear and specifically responds to the findings you receive. And we're going to go into some examples so you have an idea of what it should look like. And then please be sure to submit it on time. The last thing you want to do is miss a deadline, because then that could lead to serious deficiency and being no longer able to participate. So the next couple slides, there's a lot of words on these slides, but I wanted to make sure it was clear and that you had all the information. So for example, 1 was missing receipts. So it was April 2026 was the review month, and your analyst comes out and you do not have receipts for food purchases made in April. The reason you discovered is because you have no system for collecting, storing the documents, and the staff was not trained on maintaining original receipts. And you also had staff turnover, which we understand that happens a lot, unfortunately, more than anyone would like at some organizations. Now, when it comes to the corrective action, this is what this center determined or that the analyst highly suggested the corrective action would be, is mandatory staff training. So all staff was going to be required to be trained on anyone that was involved in purchasing or record keeping was required to take mandatory training. And the staff analyst reminded the director that the date, the agenda, the sign sheet was required for this training. They were also required to create a policy that included a standard operating procedure known as SOP for how to for receipt management. Now, here's some more details about the CAP. So the responsible person was the office manager here. Supporting documentation that was needed are these 4 items. So scanned copies of the receipts that you found, the training agenda and signed attendance sheet, which would include details of what you talked about or trained on, a copy of your new standard operating procedure, as well as a screenshot of the digital receipt log. Now, this is very specific to this example, but this is how much detail we would like to see. Okay, another example, last one is on the analyst comes out to the center and finds inaccurate meal counts. For the test month of September, the meal counts did not match the daily attendance. So why did this happen? The meal counts were not recorded at the point of service, as well as there was not a second person to come check that those meal counts were taken. So what is the corrective action for missing or inaccurate meal counts? The program director must review all meal count and attendance records for the past 3 months. So they go past previous 3 months. The process change starting November 1st of that 2 months after the test month. All classrooms were now required to record meal counts in their MyCloud software at the time each meal is served. And as a reminder, they're not filling it at the end of meal service, they're filling it in when the children were served. How are staff going to understand how to do this? They were retrained in October by the center, including all teaching and kitchen staff. They were trained on the importance of point of service meal counting, how to use their MyCloud software properly, and they have a daily cross-check process or procedure comparing attendance and meal counts to make sure accuracy. Monica was the person in charge, responsible for it. They listed the supporting documents. This is what was provided for the corrective action plan. So the attendance and meal count logs, training materials with the attendance sheet, a checklist, as well as the new procedure, and then copies of the correction. What they did this is like summarizing everything they did to correct the issue. So the more detail, the better when it comes to providing everything for a CAP. Okay, I'll briefly touch on record retention. I want to mention this because we have a change in this past couple months for how long records need to be retained in one area. So to begin with, this is the same 3 years plus the current fiscal year you need to maintain records for. When it comes to how quickly you need to be able to provide them to us, they must be readily available. So current 12 months, they must be available within 1 hour to provide us. Previous years now need to be available within 1 hour as well. In the past, believe we said a few days, but now that has changed, and we need to have them available within 1 hour. So it doesn't mean if they're electronic that we need you printing 200 pages within 1 hour to show us, but you need us to be able to access those within 1 hour. Okay, now we are almost done. So this test looks familiar because it's the same one we provided at the beginning of the training. So they're going to come up again and like to see, hopefully, if everyone's paying attention, we may have received a few more correct answers this time. So Post test should be posted here. I won't read through the questions this time because you've all seen them once. Actually, I'll read them because we have the time since it takes a little bit for it to populate. So, first one, true or false? A sponsor has 1 hour to provide records from the previous fiscal year. Number two, being on the national disqualified list still allows you to work as a director at another center. Number three, a corrective action plan known as CAP is only needed when you have meal count errors. Number four, you only need to monitor your centers or sites once a year. And last one, number five, separate accounting and financial tracking for the nonprofit food service account requires a separate bank account. I'll wait another 10, 15 seconds. We got a few more people that are still answering. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. I'll review these since it's the end. Let's see. So a sponsor has 1 hour to provide records from the previous fiscal year. That is correct. 1 hour. That is the change I talked about in the previous slide. Being on the NDL still allows you to work as a director at another center. That is false. You cannot work at any child nutrition program associated with a child care center for 7 years at minimum. A corrective action plan is only needed when you have meal count errors. That is false. There's any finding requires a corrective action plan. You only need to monitor your center once a year. That is false. It's kind of a trick question because it is centers, so it means plurals, which means you're a sponsoring organization. Let's get everyone got that right. Separate accounting and financial tracking for the nonprofit food service account requires a separate bank account. That's actually false. It's a tricky one because you need to separate your food service expenses, but you do not need to have a truly a separate bank account. So that's where the difference comes in. And we will have more training on fiscal related topics because we know it's a tricky topic and things are changing. Thankfully, we have Jared now that can help answer a lot of those questions. I wanted to share just a few of the common acronyms that I talked about today because they can be a lot. At the state, we have acronyms for pretty much anything. So I just want to put this up as a reminder for what they are. And lastly, here is the certificate that you can receive by either using the link for the form or the QR code.